everyone, it's Lisa. Welcome back to my channel. Before we get started, go ahead and click that subscribe button and click that bell icon so that you'll be notified of future videos from me. For this video, I am going to be making this card that you see here on the screen. This is a Slimline card, and I'm using the products from the Stamps of Life. Specifically, the stamp sets are the fish to stamp, dolphins to stamp, and shells to stamp. I'll also be using a stencil and some other fun things. So let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. I started off by stamping my stamps onto some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth cardstock, which is what I use when I use my Copic markers. And Copic markers are alcohol markers, so you do need that special paper as well as a special ink when you are coloring with your Copic markers. And the ink that I used is the Spectrum Noir Finesse Noir Black ink, and I will link all of these products in my blog. So I'm starting out by coloring my fish from the Fish to Stamp stamp set, and for this cute little fish I'm using some oranges. You'll see that I'm making a pattern with my colors, so I'm doing oranges and then I'm going to move on to a different color here shortly. The oranges that I'm using are the YR09, YR07, YR04, and YR01, and I start with my darkest color and blend all the way out to my lightest color. So the darkest color is the YR09, then the medium tone is the YR07, then it goes into the YR04, and then YR01. Now I'm bringing in some teals, which is the blue-green family, and I really love this color combination. I think it is so pretty, and I'm going to be using my blue-green colors. So my darkest is the BG15, then I go into the mid-tone, which is the BG13, and then I go into my lightest, which is the BG11. And I do that for all of those sections on the fish, and I will also come back in and color the same blue-green color on the fins. Again, starting with my darkest, going into my medium, all the way out to my lightest color. So you'll also see in this video that I am using not only the fish to stamp set, but I'm also using the dolphin to stamp, as well as one of the shells on the shell to stamp, which I will be showing the coloring for all of them. Moving into this fish, I'm using some blues and some yellows, and I'm just taking my darkest color, which is my B29, and I filled in all of those dots. I actually forgot a couple of them, which I'll go back in later and fill in, but all of those dots I just put the blue in. And then all of the other sections where you see some of those fins, I'm also coloring that up with blue. So I do start with my B29, which is my darkest, move into my B26, which is my mid-tone, B24, and then B23. I'm also bringing in some yellows, and I did outline pretty much the entire fish with my darkest yellow, Y17, and also that little part there that you see I outlined in Y17. And then I'm just going to bring in my mid-tone, which is Y15, right over top of the Y17, and then bring in my lightest yellow, which is Y13, and just fill everything in. And then I like to use my lightest yellow, Y13, and just kind of blend where my mid-tone and my darkest color meet, just to kind of blend those colors out just a little bit more. I will be coloring the lips up in orange, and the orange that I'm going to be using is going to be the YR09 for the lips. So I show the coloring for this third fish, but I actually don't end up using it on my card because I don't have room for it. So I do show the coloring nevertheless, and I am using the blues. Again, it's all the same colors that I've used previously, starting with the darks and then going into the medium all the way into the light. And sometimes it's difficult when you have your dark Copic markers to blend, so you might just need to go over it again with a lighter color where your darks and your lights meet, just to kind of blend that out. So I am using the blues. I'll also be using some yellows and some oranges on this fish. I also have two of the dolphins, but I only end up using one of them, but I still show the coloring for both. So I have one that I can just save for another card. So the Fish to Stamp stamp set was actually my very first Die Hard Club shipment when I joined the Die Hard Club from the Stamps of Life way back in 2017. And so that's how long I've had this stamp set. I have another card tutorial that I did with this stamp as well as with the Dolphins stamp set. It's actually a box card, and I will link that down below in case you're interested. That video that I created, it was probably about a year ago, and it is with the smaller box card die, which the Stamps of Life does not sell anymore. However, they do sell a larger one, which is a 5x7 size. The one that I have my video on my YouTube is actually the smaller one. But in case you're interested in that, I will link that down below and you can take a look at that as well. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and set this to music so that you can watch the coloring, and I will be back when the coloring is over and then we'll finish up with the card. I have a piece of watercolor cardstock that I cut down to 3¼ by 8¼ because I am making a slimline card. This will be my top layer for my card base. And I'm doing some ink blending. I took 4 blue colors from the Stamps of Life ink, started out with my Midnight at the very bottom. Then I go into my blueberry ink. I will lead into my pool and then my ocean. So I start with the dark at the very bottom, and then I do the lighter color, the next lightest color, and then followed by the ocean, which is the very lightest color all the way at the top, because this is going to be an underwater scene. And I am using the watercolor cardstock because I am going to be using water on this card, and watercolor cardstock will hold the water much better than regular cardstock. And I am using my blending tool. You can use a blending brush if you have one of those. And here I'm taking my large circle stencil. This stencil actually came with the windmill class kit. I sprayed it with some water and then I set it on my card layer. And then while I set it there, I let it soak for a minute, and then I used a paper towel to wipe up some of that water. And then because my card layer is so long, I did the same to the top where the stencil didn't reach, and I just repeated the process there at the top. Now, I didn't worry about my stencil not coming all the way at the bottom of the cardstock layer where the midnight color is, because as you'll see as we progress through this card tutorial, I'm going to end up covering that section up anyways. And then the last thing I did here is just take my spray bottle of water and just spritz a couple drops of water on that cardstock layer and then wipe them up with a paper towel, and it just gives a really neat underwater effect. And then I used my heat tool to dry this cardstock layer because I knew I was going to immediately work with it and I could not work with a wet piece of paper. So here I took my hillside border die that came with the borders die set and I cut a piece of ginger snap cardstock. I am using the sand stamp from the Island to Visit set, and I am using chocolate ink, and I'm just stamping some chocolate ink onto that border. I'm also inking up the edges with some ginger snap ink just to add a little bit of dimension to that layer. Next, I'm taking the background die, which is the vine, and that comes from the Flower Vine and Grid A2 card base, and I just die cut it out of some green apple cardstock, and I'm going to be snipping away some of these vines because I will be able to use them in my card. And once I have some snipped away, I will add some green apple ink to the edges of those just to add a little bit of dimension. I do cut the flowers off, I only need the vines. So you'll see that only the vines are left and I cut all of the flowers away. And here I'm just positioning them where I want them to go on my card layer. They are going to go underneath the hillside border that I cut out, so that will be on top. That's why you see that they're not all the way at the bottom of that card layer. So I'm applying some glue to the backs of these, adding them down to my card layer, and then I will add that hillside border, which replicates the sand or the bottom of the ocean, and that will be layered right there at the bottom, which will be over top of the bottom of those vines. So once I add that, I'm going to just add some glue to the back, and it is a little bit longer than that card panel, so I will just turn that panel over and trim off the excess sand. Next, I'm placing that entire panel in my MISTI. I did position my stamps where I want them to go on it just so I could see where I want my sentiment to be. I am using the You Are Fantastic sentiment from the Dolphins to Stamp set, and I use some Forever Black ink to stamp that up, and then I am just positioning these fish again where I want them to go, and then I will add some glue to the backs and add them to my card layer. You can see that seashell, the one little lonely seashell that I used from the shell to stamp, is there at the bottom of the card. Now I did not mention all of the colors that I used for all of these stamps, but all of the colors will be linked in my blog. So if you go down to the description box on this YouTube video, there will be a link to my blog where you'll be able to see all of the Copic colors as well as all of the products that I used on this card. So here I'm just adhering this panel to my card base, and the card base is actually a piece of powdered sugar cardstock that's cut to 8.5 by 7 and then scored at 3.5 inches. Last thing I do is just take some sequins and add them to the card, and that completes this card. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe for more card making inspiration from me. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.